The sound of boots on steel and the low hum of the hangar fans mixed into a rhythm that had become second nature to me over the years. I had stood in spaces like this countless times, in uniform, spine straight, face unreadable, but never like this. Never with the weight of 12 years balanced on my shoulders in front of an entire command, never with my name written on the order that would carry me into the next chapter of my career. I remember the light more than anything. It poured in through the wide bay doors of the hangar, streaks of gold carving through the dust motes that hovered in the air. That light hit the polished brass, the edges of dress blues, the bright white gloves of the honor guard. It even caught on the sheen of my own shoes I had shined by hand at 3 a.m. because I wanted nothing out of place on this day. My cover was tucked under my arm, my hand steady even though my pulse was a constant drumbeat inside my chest. The commanding officer stood a few feet away, his voice projecting with the kind of authority only years of service could carve. He was reading the promotion order, each syllable bouncing off the steel walls, wrapping around the sailors and airmen gathered there. The words were ceremonial, scripted, but to me they sounded like freedom, like vindication. My father's voice echoed in the back of my mind, the way he used to tell me that Chavez blood was meant to carry weight, meant to serve. I never said it aloud, but I always believed I was serving not just my country, but him. My crew stood in formation, their eyes fixed on me. Some were young, too young, with the restless energy of recruits barely out of training. Others were seasoned, men and women who had flown more sorties than I could count, who had seen me at my worst and still followed me. I could feel their pride even though none of them spoke. This was supposed to be their moment too. And then, like a crack slicing through glass, I heard it. Faith. It was not said with respect, not with discipline. It was shouted, raw, unfiltered, carrying the weight of resentment that had been building for years. My brother's voice, Gabriel. The sound ripped me out of the ceremony. I turned and saw him pushing through the crowd, not in uniform, not cleared, not even dressed for the gravity of the occasion. Just Gabriel in civilian clothes, his jaw tight, his eyes wild, his footsteps echoing far too loudly in a space meant for order. For a moment, my brain refused to believe it was happening. My mind told me it had to be a mistake, some nightmare that had slipped into daylight. He should not have been there. He could not have been there. But there he was. Every head in the hangar turned toward him. The commanding officer faltered mid-sentence, the silence that followed so heavy it pressed against my skin. I could feel the air thicken, the ceremony collapsing before it had even finished. Gabriel's eyes locked on me with a fury that burned hotter than any desert sun we had flown over in deployment. His voice cracked the silence. You lied to me, you lied to all of us. I felt the words like bullets. My crew shifted uneasily, their disciplined posture breaking for the first time. Whispers cut through the silence. Some of them glanced at me, others at the general officers present, but no one moved. No one knew what to do when family crashed into formation like an enemy strike. My body was rigid, my face locked in the mask of an officer, but inside I was unraveling. I had fought through nights of tracer fire, I had pulled wounded men from burning wreckage, I had faced storms that threatened to rip our aircraft out of the sky. Yet nothing had prepared me for the sight of my brother turning my promotion into a battlefield. You think you can erase Dad's legacy, he spat, his finger stabbing the air toward me. You think you deserve that rank. I could feel the eyes of every young airman burning into me, waiting to see if their commander would flinch. For one horrifying moment, I did. My chest burned, my throat locked, and I felt as though Gabriel had reached across the hangar and slapped me in front of them all. And then a voice cut through the chaos. Enough. It was General Marcus Kellen. His presence was not just physical, it was gravitational. He moved forward with the authority of storms, the kind of command presence that made people straighten even if they were already standing at attention. I had only spoken to him in brief exchanges before, never anything beyond the bounds of formality. But now he stood between me and my brother as though a line had been drawn across the floor. Touch her again and you will regret it. The words were low, but they carried. They carried enough to silence the whispers, enough to freeze the air, enough to ripple outward like shockwaves. And then came the part that made the air shatter. She is my wife. It did not matter that it was not true. It did not matter that no one in that hangar could possibly make sense of it. The words hung there like a flare in the night sky, impossible to ignore, impossible to forget. My wife. The reaction was instant. A collective intake of breath, a subtle shift in posture, the exchange of glances between officers and crew alike. In an instant, he had tied his name to mine, his reputation to mine, his authority to my fractured moment. My thoughts spun so fast I thought I might collapse. Why would he say that? Why me? Why here in front of everyone? The questions flooded me, but there was no time for answers. The ceremony broke down within minutes. My promotion order unfinished, my crew ushered out by officers who spoke in hushed tones, my commanding officer's expression unreadable as he quietly ordered the dispersal. I could not look anyone in the eye. My uniform felt like armor turned against me, too heavy, too suffocating. My chest was on fire, but my face stayed still. I could not let them see me falter, not after everything. Minutes later, I found myself in a private briefing room. The walls were lined with plaques, the kind that reminded you of history, of tradition, of duty. But none of that mattered. The room was a battlefield too, one without bullets but with wounds just as deep. Gabriel paced like a trapped animal, his words sharp, his voice breaking the air into shards. He was furious, not just at me, but at something older, something buried in the soil of our family for years. He accused, he demanded, he hurled memories like knives. And General Kellen stood silently, his presence filling the room. He did not repeat his claim. He did not explain it. He just stood there, unmovable, watching me, watching Gabriel, his expression unreadable. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to rip off the uniform and run as far away from that room as I could. But I did none of that. I stood still. Because that was all I knew how to do. My brother's accusations blurred into white noise. My commanding officer's face burned into my memory, his eyes carrying questions I could not answer. And through all of it, one phrase echoed in my mind, louder than anything else. My wife. I did not understand it. I did not want to understand it. But I knew this. From this moment on, nothing in my career, nothing in my family, nothing in my life would ever be the same. The door shut behind us with a metallic clang, the kind that made the room feel smaller than it was. Silence pressed against the walls, thick enough to suffocate. Gabriel's breathing was sharp, uneven, as if he had sprinted across the entire base just to unleash his fury here. My hands remained flat against my thighs, nails digging into fabric, because if I let go, if I moved even slightly, I feared the rage and humiliation churning in me would spill over. Gabriel spoke first. He always did. His words came in bursts, like punches thrown at shadows. You think a new rank erases the past. You think Dad would be proud of this? Proud of you? The mention of our father cracked something inside me, but I forced my face to stay stone still. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing my pain. Still, the memory hit. My father's boots by the door, his laugh when he told us we would carry the Chavez name higher than he ever could. For Gabriel, that memory had become a chain. For me, it was a compass. General Kellen did not flinch. He stood tall, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on Gabriel with the patience of a man who had stared down enemy fire. His silence was not passive. It was deliberate, a warning wrapped in restraint. Gabriel pointed at me again. She has been lying and you are protecting her. Why? What does she have on you? My jaw tightened. That was the moment I wanted to shout, to cut him down with every ounce of authority my rank carried. But I knew if I raised my voice, I would lose. Because this was not a battlefield measured in ground gained. This was a battlefield of perception. The general's earlier words, my wife, still hung like smoke in the air, twisting into everything, reshaping how Gabriel's accusations sounded, reshaping how I would be seen by anyone who heard them. General Kellen finally spoke. His tone was calm, controlled, but sharp enough to slice through the tension. You are out of line. Gabriel laughed, bitter and reckless. Out of line. I am not the one pretending family is military business. Look at her. She has you wrapped around her finger. My chest burned. His words painted me as something I was, manipulative, weak, dependent, everything I had fought not to be, every medal I had earned, every mission I had survived, every sacrifice I had made, reduced in his voice to a smear, a suggestion that I had climbed on someone else's shoulders. I turned on him then, my voice low, steady, but trembling with a fury I had buried for too long. You don't belong here, Gabriel. This is not your fight. It is my fight, he snapped back. You took everything Dad gave us and twisted it. You made it yours, not ours. The words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. For years I had known Gabriel resented me, but hearing it out loud in front of the general, in front of my own uniform, made the wound raw. He believed I had stolen something sacred. The truth was simpler, but maybe more painful. I had chosen to carry the legacy, and he had chosen not to. Kellen stepped forward then, closing the distance with the weight of his presence. His shadow fell across Gabriel, but his eyes were on me. He did not look at me with accusation or pity. He looked at me as though I were steel being tested in fire. "Enough," he said again, softer this time. "You will not destroy her in this room." For a moment, I almost hated him for stepping in, because part of me wanted Gabriel to see me fight back, to see me burn with the fire I kept buried beneath duty. But another part of me, the part that knew politics and power, understood what Kellen was doing. He was placing himself between us not just as a shield, but as a signal. To anyone watching, to anyone who would hear of this, I was not alone. The irony was that his protection could destroy me as easily as it saved me. Gabriel sneered, muttered something under his breath that I could not catch, and then shoved past the door. The sound of his footsteps faded down the hallway, leaving behind silence so heavy I could hear my own heartbeat. When we were alone, Kellen turned to me. His face was carved from stone, but his eyes softened in a way I had never seen before. "You need to hold your ground, Chavez. They will come for you after this, harder than before." I swallowed hard. My throat was dry, my voice raw. "Why did you say that?" He didn't ask what I meant, he knew. His answer was measured, deliberate, because in that moment it was the only way to stop him. I wanted to believe that. Part of me did, but another part whispered doubts. Doubts about why he chose those words, why he tied my name to his in front of the entire command. I had no answers, only questions that tangled tighter the more I tried to pull them apart. When the briefing ended, I walked alone across the tarmac. The hangar was empty now, silent except for the echo of my own footsteps. The flag still hung above the stage where I had stood hours earlier, waiting for the promotion that never came. My chest ached as I looked at it, not because I doubted my service, but because I knew the whispers would spread faster than any official order. She is his wife. That was the story now, whether it was true or not. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the gold light faded into a harsh red glow. The day that was supposed to be the proudest of my career had ended in scandal, in family betrayal, in words that bound me to a man I barely knew. I wanted to tell myself it was temporary, that it would fade, but deep down I knew better. The Air Force was built on perception as much as power, and perception had just shifted beneath my feet like an earthquake. That night, I sat alone in my quarters, the silence pressing down heavier than body armor. My dress blues hung in the corner, the creases sharp, the insignia gleaming, but I could not look at them. Not when they reminded me of what the day had promised and what it had stolen. I replayed every moment, every word, every glance, searching for something I could hold on to, something that would anchor me. But all I found was the echo of my brother's accusations and the general's impossible claim. My wife. The words would not leave me. They circled my thoughts until I could hardly breathe. They carried questions I was not ready to face, consequences I could not yet imagine. But one truth cut through the noise with brutal clarity. My life, my career, my name, everything I had built, was no longer entirely my own. And the fight to reclaim it had only just begun. The morning after the ceremony felt colder than any deployment night I had ever spent in the desert. The base was the same, flags rippling in the wind, aircraft lined up like sleeping giants on the tarmac, the salty tang of the ocean drifting in, but nothing felt familiar anymore. I walked with my cover tucked beneath my arm, my uniform crisp, my salute sharp, but I could feel the whispers following me like shadows. They did not say it to my face, not yet. But I could see it in the way conversations cut off when I entered a room, in the way glances shifted sideways instead of meeting my eyes. Respect had once flowed easily, earned through years of leading missions, of flying into storms that could tear steel apart. Now it was being chipped away, one rumor at a time. "She is the general's wife." The words spread faster than wildfire. I overheard them in the cafeteria line, disguised as jokes. I heard them in the gym, hidden behind grunts and clanging weights. Even the young airmen who once looked at me with unwavering trust now carried questions in their eyes. Command summoned me before noon. The office was cold, the blinds drawn, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee. My commanding officer did not look up immediately when I entered. His pen scratched across paper, deliberate, almost too deliberate. When he finally raised his gaze, there was no anger there, no sympathy either, just calculation. "Chavez," he said, his voice clipped, formal. "Yesterday's incident is already circulating. Washington has heard." My stomach tightened. Washington. That word was heavier than any accusation. It meant this was no longer local gossip. It meant politics, oversight, reputations larger than mine. I tried to speak, but he raised a hand. "This is not the place for explanations. What matters is control. If you lose control of the narrative, you lose everything." The words landed like a blow. Control. It was the one thing I had always clung to, in combat and in command. the ability to make decisions in chaos, to keep others steady when the world tilted. And now that control was slipping away. You will stay on duty, he continued, but every step you take will be watched. Every word will be measured. If there is any truth to the speculation, there isn't, I said sharply, too quickly, my voice carrying more emotion than I intended. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in belief, not in disbelief, but in the way a man reads a storm rolling across the horizon. We will see, he said, dismissing me with a flick of his pen. I left the office with my chest burning, the weight of suspicion pressing heavier than any pack I had carried on my back in deployment. By afternoon, I was in the simulator room with my squadron. The mission was routine, a simulated search and rescue designed to keep reflexes sharp. Normally, I thrived in these drills, barking commands, maneuvering my team with precision. But today, every order I gave felt like it echoed back with doubt. Lieutenant Harper, one of the younger pilots, hesitated when I told him to adjust formation. His eyes flicked toward me, then toward the others, as if silently asking if my authority still stood. The hesitation was brief, barely a second, but I caught it, and it lodged deep inside me. I pushed harder, driving the team through maneuvers, forcing perfection until sweat stung their eyes and breath came ragged. I told myself it was training, discipline, leadership. But deep down, I knew I was trying to remind them and myself that I still belonged here. When the drill ended, Harper approached me. He looked nervous, his helmet tucked under his arm, his eyes darting around to make sure no one was close enough to overhear. "Ma'am," he began, his voice low, "I just wanted to say, whatever people are saying, it doesn't matter to us. You've led us through worse. I should have been grateful. I should have felt relief." But instead, the words twisted inside me. It doesn't matter. Of course it mattered. The fact that he had to say it meant the doubt was there, alive, spreading. That night I tried calling my mother. Elena Chavez answered on the third ring, her voice heavy with exhaustion, though it was only early evening. "Mama, it's me." There was a pause long enough to sting. Then her voice, quiet, uncertain. "I heard what happened." Of course she had. News like this traveled faster than truth. "It's not what it looks like," I said quickly, hating the desperation in my tone. Her sigh was soft, but it carried more weight than Gabriel's shouts. "Faith, you know how your brother is. He feels cheated." "Cheated?" My voice cracked. "He stormed into a military ceremony, Mama. He embarrassed me in front of my entire command." "He is hurting," she replied gently. "He thinks you broke the promise you made to your father." The words cut deeper than I expected, because once, years ago, I had made that promise. I had told my father on his hospital bed that I would keep our family together, that I would carry his name with honor. And maybe, in Gabriel's eyes, I had failed. I closed my eyes, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Mama, this is bigger than family now. People are saying things, dangerous things." She didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her words were hesitant, fragile. "Just be careful, Mija. The higher you climb, the harder people will try to pull you down." Her voice lingered even after I hung up, echoing in the silence of my quarters. Later, as I sat at my desk, I opened the incident report from security. I forced myself to read it line by line, though every sentence tightened my chest. Gabriel had entered the base through the west gate. His name was logged, his ID checked. And that was the detail that made my blood run cold. He should not have had access. His civilian ID should have raised alarms, but it hadn't. Someone had cleared him. Someone inside. The report ended there, sterile and inconclusive, but the implication was clear. My brother had not acted alone. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of it sinking into me. This was no longer just family drama spilling into uniform. This was a breach, a crack in the walls we trusted to hold. And if someone inside had let him through, then my brother's outburst was only the beginning. The following days blurred into a rhythm of strained smiles, clipped conversations, and silence that weighed heavier than words. Every corridor I walked felt narrower, as though the walls themselves were closing in. I had survived combat zones, where every sound carried the possibility of danger, but here on my own base, it was the silence that cut me to pieces. I tried to keep my posture perfect, my voice steady, but my reflection in the mirror betrayed me. The faint shadows beneath my eyes, the stiffness in my shoulders, the way my jaw ached from holding it clenched. Rumors do not leave bruises, yet they mark you all the same. The whispers grew bolder. Once they were murmured behind doors, now they surfaced in the open. I caught two officers in the mess hall cutting their conversation short when I entered, their laughter turning brittle. Another day, as I passed the hangar, a young mechanic muttered something under his breath, "Wife of the general," and though he thought I could not hear, the words struck with precision. I confronted it head-on once during a briefing with my squadron. They shifted uneasily under my gaze, and I knew I had to address it. I told them the mission mattered more than gossip, that lives depended on discipline, not rumor. My voice was sharp, my tone colder than usual. They nodded, they saluted, but their eyes still carried questions. Control, that was the word my commanding officer had used. But control is fragile when doubt seeps into the cracks. 3 nights after the ceremony, I found myself summoned again, this time by General Kellen himself. His office was larger than most, decorated with plaques and maps, the faint smell of leather and coffee lingering in the air. He gestured for me to sit, his expression unreadable. "You have seen the report," he said. I nodded, my hands resting tightly on my knees. "Yes, sir. Gabriel should not have been able to pass security. Someone cleared him." Kellen leaned back, his gaze steady. "Exactly, which means the problem is bigger than your brother." The words sank like stones in my stomach. Bigger than my brother. I wanted to argue, to say Gabriel had acted alone, that his anger had driven him past reason. But the evidence refused to be ignored. A breach like this did not happen by accident. "Who?" I asked, forcing my voice calm. "Who would risk it?" "That is what we will find out," he replied. His tone was measured, deliberate, as though every word carried weight beyond this room. "For now, you should know that eyes are on you. Washington is watching closely. Some believe you were complicit." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Complicit. The word was poison. "I have nothing to do with this," I said, my voice sharper than intended. "I know," Kellen replied evenly, "but belief does not always follow truth. You must tread carefully." The conversation ended with more silence than resolution. As I left his office, the corridors felt colder, the shadows longer. The idea that I might be seen not as a victim of my brother's recklessness, but as part of it, twisted my stomach into knots. That night, I walked the perimeter of the base alone, the ocean wind biting at my skin. The fences gleamed under the floodlights, the hum of generators filling the air. This was supposed to be the safest place I knew, yet I felt exposed, vulnerable, as though the ground itself had shifted. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from an unknown number. He didn't get in alone. I froze, the glow of the screen burning into my palm. The message carried no name, no detail, just those words. My pulse raced. My first instinct was to delete it, pretend it had never appeared. But I couldn't. I stared at it until the letters blurred, my breath shallow. Was it a warning? A threat? A manipulation? I typed a reply, "Who is this?" But no answer came. The message sat there, silent, a reminder that I was being watched from somewhere I could not see. Back in my quarters, I locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed, the message replaying in my mind. I thought of Gabriel's face, his fury, his accusations. What if he had not come alone? What if someone had pushed him into this, fed him the idea, opened the gate for him? The thought chilled me, not because of what it meant for him, but because of what it meant for me. If Gabriel was being used, then I was already caught in a net I could not see, my career, my family, my name all entangled in something larger. Sleep refused to come. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the hum of the base generators steady in the distance. My father's voice echoed in memory, "Carry the name with honor," and I wondered if honor was enough when shadows were pulling strings around me. By dawn, I had made a decision. I would not wait for others to control the story. If someone inside had helped Gabriel, then I needed to find out who. Because if I didn't, the narrative would write itself and I would be buried in it. The sun rose over the horizon, casting the base in pale light. Another day began, ordinary on the surface, extraordinary beneath it. I straightened my uniform, fastened my insignia, and looked into the mirror. The woman staring back at me was tired, yes, and marked by doubt. But she was not broken. Not yet. I whispered to my reflection words only I could hear. "Control. Take it back." And with that, I stepped into the corridor, ready to face whatever waited. Because deep down, I knew the storm had only just begun. The alarm came just after dawn, sharp and relentless, cutting through the quiet hum of the base. My quarters vibrated with the sound, and before I could even process the words spilling through the intercom, I was on my feet, uniform half-buttoned, boots clattering against the floor. "Search and rescue, down aircraft, civilian casualties possible." Those words alone were enough to send adrenaline rushing through my veins. Rescue missions were unforgiving. They required precision, courage, and discipline measured down to the second. One mistake and lives were lost. By the time I reached the hangar, the crew was already assembling, their faces taut, their eyes searching mine. For a moment I saw it again, the flicker of doubt, the unspoken question of whether their commander still belonged on this line. The rumors had followed me here, into the space I once owned with unchallenged authority. I forced my voice steady. We have a civilian aircraft down 15 clicks east, coordinates already fed into your systems. Possible fire, possible survivors. We go in fast, we come out faster. They nodded, helmets clutched in hands, adrenaline sparking. I walked with them toward the aircraft, the metallic scent of fuel mixing with the salt air, the rotors whining to life. This was where I felt most alive, on the edge of chaos, in the roar of engines, with lives waiting on the other side of a decision. As we lifted off, the world shrank to the cockpit and the headset in my ear. The ocean gleamed beneath us, endless and unforgiving, the horizon stretching like a blade. My crew moved like a machine, each one locked into their role, but I could feel their eyes on me through the glass, waiting to see if the Faith Chavez who had once led them through fire was still there. Halfway to the crash site, turbulence rocked the aircraft. Lightning forked across the horizon, a storm cell forming faster than forecast had predicted. I gripped the controls tighter, steadying us against the sudden gusts. My co-pilot glanced at me, worry flickering in his eyes. "Ma'am, do we divert?" I shook my head. "Negative. Survivors don't wait for clear skies." The words steadied me as much as they steadied him. I had learned long ago that confidence, even when it wavered inside, had to sound like iron on the outside. Minutes later, smoke rose in the distance, a dark smear against the horizon. The downed aircraft lay broken in a field of marshland, flames licking at twisted metal. My chest tightened. I had seen wreckage like this before, the smell of fuel and burning rubber sinking into my memory like scars. "Eyes sharp," I said, voice cutting through the comms. "Harper, flank right. Diaz, cover our 6. We're on approach." The aircraft shuddered as we descended. Heat waves shimmered from the fire below, the wind howling through broken trees. My boots hit the ground first, sinking into wet earth, the heat from the flames licking against my skin even through the gear. The wreckage crackled, the sound of shifting metal mingling with the groans of the injured. I moved fast, pulling a survivor from the wreckage with Diaz's help. Blood smeared across my gloves, my muscles straining against weight and fear. The man coughed, eyes wide with shock but alive. Behind me, Harper carried another, his jaw tight, his movements sharp. For a moment, I forgot the rumors. For a moment, it was only the mission, only the raw truth of saving lives. Then the storm struck. A wall of rain pounded the site, winds howling with sudden ferocity. The flames hissed, the wreckage groaned, and visibility dropped in seconds. My comms crackled, voices breaking with static. "Chavez, we're losing power on the north flank." Harper's voice strained, urgent. My mind spun through options. The storm was tearing at us, and if we stayed too long, we would be trapped. "Extract now," I ordered, forcing my voice calm. "Move." The crew obeyed, dragging survivors through mud and rain. I took the rear, my body screaming with exhaustion, but my grip unrelenting. The aircraft loomed ahead, rotors whipping rain into a frenzy. As we loaded the last survivor, lightning split the sky, illuminating faces streaked with mud and fear. For a heartbeat, I caught Harper's eyes on me, fearful, yes, but something else too. Respect. The storm fought us the entire way back, turbulence rattling the aircraft, lightning flashing so close I could smell the ozone. But when we touched down, the survivors still breathing, the crew still intact, I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The hangar lights burned warm against the storm outside. Medics rushed forward, pulling survivors onto stretchers, shouting orders drowned by the roar of the storm. I stood in the shadows, dripping wet, blood and mud smeared across my uniform. One by one, my crew approached me. Harper gave a sharp nod, his expression unreadable. Diaz clapped my shoulder, a brief but powerful gesture. No words, just acknowledgement. And for the first time since the ceremony, I felt the faintest spark of what I had feared was lost. Their trust. But it was fragile, a flicker in a storm. Because even as relief coursed through me, an officer approached with a tablet in hand, his expression grim. "Ma'am, you need to see this." The report glowed on the screen, words sharp in the dim light. Security footage of Gabriel's entry had been reviewed again. And this time, something new was visible. A figure standing at the gate, their face obscured, their hand on the scanner. Someone in uniform. The implication hit me like the storm had all over again. Gabriel hadn't slipped through a crack. He had been escorted in, by someone on the inside. The flicker of trust I had just begun to reclaim trembled. Because if there was a traitor among us, then nothing, not even saving lives in a storm, would shield me from suspicion. The storm raged through the night, lashing against the hangar walls, but inside there was a quiet hum of order. Medics moved efficiently, voices clipped, hands steady as they worked on the survivors. The smell of antiseptic mixed with the lingering burn of fuel and smoke. My crew sat on benches along the wall, soaked through, mud streaked across their faces, exhaustion etched into their bones. Yet their eyes held something I had not seen in days: certainty. They had followed me through fire and rain, and we had come back together. That meant something. But victory is fragile, and in the military, it never lasts long. While the medics tended to the survivors, I stood with the officer who had handed me the tablet. The footage replayed, grainy but clear enough. Gabriel's face, angry, determined, stepping past the gate. And beside him, a figure in uniform. The image froze as the officer tapped the screen, enlarging the moment when the hand pressed against the scanner. It was too blurred to make out rank, too distant to confirm identity. But the posture was unmistakable, someone who belonged. Someone who had no business helping Gabriel. I forced my voice low, steady though my stomach twisted. Who else has seen this? Only command, and now you, ma'am. Orders were to keep it contained until further notice. Contained. The word left a bitter taste. Secrets never stayed contained on a base like this. Rumors spread like wildfire, truth twisted before it ever reached the surface. Keep it that way, I said, my voice sharp. For now. The officer nodded, saluted, and slipped away, leaving me alone with the screen. I stared at it until my reflection blurred into the image, my own face overlapping the shadowy figure at Gabriel's side. The irony was suffocating. I had spent days fighting whispers that I was complicit, that I had used Kellen's name to shield myself. And now, the evidence suggested someone had shielded Gabriel, someone in uniform, someone with access, and because he was my brother, suspicion would circle back to me like vultures to a carcass. I shut the tablet and closed my eyes, the roar of the storm outside filling the silence. By morning, the base was buzzing again. The storm had passed, leaving puddles on the tarmac and the air heavy with salt. The rescue mission was logged as a success, 3 survivors pulled from the wreckage, 0 crew lost. Commendations were already being discussed. On paper, it was the kind of mission that reminded command why I wore this uniform. In practice, it only deepened the shadows around me. During the debrief, Harper spoke up. His voice was firm, confident, carrying the weight of someone who had once doubted but had seen enough to believe. Colonel Chavez kept us alive out there. No one else could have done what she did. The words warmed something deep inside me, something I thought had gone cold. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Even Diaz nodded sharply, his eyes catching mine with a flicker of loyalty. But then the commander cleared his throat, cutting through the moment like a blade. Commendable work, Chavez. However, questions remain regarding your brother's access to this base. Until those questions are answered, all commendations are provisional. Provisional. Another word that stung. Recognition dangled like bait, withheld until the storm around Gabriel settled. My triumph was already being rewritten, tied not to what I had done but to what he had done. When the meeting ended, I lingered behind. My commanding officer gave me a long, measured look before speaking quietly. Washington is restless. They want answers. And until we have them, you are under a microscope. One misstep, one shadow, and you're finished. I saluted, my hand steady even as my insides trembled. Yes, sir. As I left the room, I felt the weight of unseen eyes on me, the corridors longer, the shadows darker. Everyone was watching, waiting, measuring me against whispers they couldn't prove but desperately wanted to believe. That night in the mess hall, I sat alone. My tray untouched, the hum of voices around me buzzing like static. Across the room, 2 officers leaned in close, their words too soft to hear but their glances too sharp to ignore. Wife of the general, complicit, brother, breach. The words swirled in my head louder than the storm had ever been. I pushed my tray aside and left, the air outside biting against my skin. I walked along the perimeter fence again, the floodlights throwing long shadows across the ground. Every step echoed louder than it should have. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Another message, same unknown number. The breach is not about him, it's about you. I froze, my breath sharp in my throat. My hands trembled as I read the words again, over and over as if they might change. Not about him, about me. The air felt colder, the fence higher, the night darker. Whoever was behind this was not just using Gabriel to strike at the base. They were reaching for me. And for the first time, I realized the truth I had been avoiding. This was not family drama bleeding into my career. This was something larger, something calculated. Gabriel had been a piece, not the board, the foreshadow of a storm I had not yet seen fully. I clenched the phone in my hand, my heart pounding. If this was about me, then the fight ahead was no longer just about clearing my name. It was about survival. The storm outside had passed, but the one inside was only beginning. General Marcus Kellen's office was nothing like mine. Mine was functional, 2 filing cabinets, a desk that always seemed too small for the weight of paperwork it carried, and a bulletin board cluttered with mission charts. His, on the other hand, looked like something carved from the backbone of history itself. Framed photographs lined the walls, black and white shots of squadrons from decades past, medals mounted beneath glass, a massive map of the world with colored pins marking places most people only knew from headlines. The leather chairs creaked when I sat, their age and weight a reminder that men who held power here stayed long enough to shape entire generations. Kellen himself leaned back behind the desk, his uniform immaculate, his expression one of deliberate calm. He wasn't a man who wasted movements. Every gesture felt measured, rehearsed in silence before it left his body. "You've been under pressure, Chavez," he said, his voice carrying both authority and something quieter, something almost personal. I didn't deny it. "Sir, with respect, pressure isn't new, but this is different." He studied me for a moment, his eyes sharp enough to read more than my words. Different because it's personal. I clenched my hands in my lap, forcing myself not to shift under his gaze. My brother, the rumors, the messages I hadn't told anyone about. He wasn't wrong. This was personal in a way war never had been. He leaned forward then, resting his elbows on the desk. "Chavez, I know what people are saying. I know the weight of whispers. But I also know what I've seen. You're not here because of me. You're here because you've earned it." The words should have steadied me, but instead they twisted inside. Earned it. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But every corridor I walked told me otherwise. Every side glance reminded me that belief was fragile. "With respect, sir," I said carefully, "the more you defend me, the worse it gets. They think I'm leaning on you." Kellen's mouth curved, not quite a smile. "Let them think what they want. What matters is that you do your job and you do it well." It sounded simple, but nothing about this was simple. His defense was a shield, yes, but it was also a chain. Every time he stepped forward, it tethered me to him tighter. "Why did you say it, sir?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. "My wife." For a heartbeat, the air in the room stilled. His eyes didn't flinch, didn't waver. "Because it stopped him," he said finally. It gave him pause. That was all, just a tactic to buy silence in a hangar full of people. His expression gave me no answer beyond that single explanation. But the silence that followed was heavier than words. He stood then, moving toward the map on the wall, his back to me. There are moments in command where you don't get to choose the perfect action, only the one that prevents collapse. Collapse. That word resonated. Wasn't that what I had been fighting since the ceremony? The collapse of control, of trust, of identity. When he turned back, his eyes softened slightly. "You have potential, Chavez, more than you realize. Washington sees it too. That's why you're being considered for the leadership program." The words hit me harder than I expected. Washington, the program, a chance to prove myself beyond the space, beyond the whispers. Yet my chest tightened all the same. If I was already under suspicion, being elevated would only paint a bigger target on my back. "Sir," I began, but he cut me off with a raised hand. "Think about it, but don't let fear make your decision." The meeting ended soon after, but his words followed me out, echoing through every corridor. Washington, leadership program, potential. My head spun with possibilities, my stomach knotted with dread. Outside, the base felt different again. The storm had cleared days ago, but the air still carried tension, heavy as if waiting for another break. I walked across the tarmac, past crews prepping aircraft, past salutes that felt stiff, rehearsed. They saw me, but they didn't trust me. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That night, I sat alone in my quarters, staring at the message still glowing on my phone. "The breach is not about him. It's about you." The words sank deeper with every repetition. If this was about me, then the program in Washington wasn't just an opportunity. It was bait. A stage where the spotlight would only make me easier to target. I leaned back, closing my eyes, exhaustion dragging at my body. But I knew sleep would not come. Not while shadows were moving around me, unseen hands pulling strings that bound both me and my brother. And for the first time, I wondered if General Kellen was truly a shield or another hand on the strings. The base always looked different at night. The floodlights painted harsh pools of white across the tarmac, leaving everything else in shadow. Engines roared in the distance, the metallic scent of oil and fuel clinging to the air, but beneath it all was a tension that never eased. I had walked these grounds for over a decade, yet lately every step felt heavier, every glance sharper, every silence louder. After the meeting with Kellen, my name was already circulating in new ways. Washington, leadership program, potential. On the surface, those words sounded like progress, like reward. but I had been in the military long enough to know better. Every promotion, every step forward came with eyes waiting to drag you back down. And with Gabriel's breach still hanging over me, this step forward felt less like recognition and more like exposure. The squadron felt it too. At morning drill, their eyes followed me, uncertain, testing. Their salutes were sharp, their responses crisp, but something underneath had shifted. Trust once flowed without question, now it came with hesitation. During a tactical planning session, Diaz asked a question he would never have asked 6 months ago. "Ma'am," he said, his tone cautious, "are we certain Washington's choice is about merit or politics?" The words hung heavy in the air. A few heads tilted, others stared hard at their tablets, pretending not to listen but listening all the same. My jaw tightened. I forced my voice calm, sharp. "Washington doesn't waste time on politics when lives are on the line." Diaz nodded, muttering a quiet "yes, ma'am," but the question had already done its damage. It wasn't about his belief, it was about planting doubt in the others. Doubt that I was rising because of skill or because of whispers tying me to a general. After the session, Harper caught me in the corridor. He was younger, less polished, but sharp enough to see the cracks others missed. His voice was low, hesitant. "They're talking, ma'am. They think you'll take the program, that you'll leave us, as if ambition were betrayal. As if staying here, drowning under suspicion, would prove my loyalty better than taking a chance to lead on a larger scale." I gave him the answer he needed to hear, not the one I felt. "I'll never abandon my squadron." The words tasted like ash even as they left my mouth. Because the truth was, if Washington offered me the program, I would take it. Not for ambition, not for pride, but because staying here meant letting the shadows close in until I suffocated. That night, as I prepared my after-action reports, another message appeared on my phone. Same unknown number. The man at the gate was not random. He was placed. "Look closer at those around you." I froze, my pen slipping from my hand, ink smearing across the page. "Look closer. Around me." The message replayed in my mind as I stared at the faces of my crew in the debrief photo pinned above my desk. Diaz, Harper, Nguyen, Lopez, men and women I had trusted with my life. Could one of them be part of this? Could one of them have stood at that gate, hand on the scanner, letting Gabriel through? The thought twisted my stomach. These were people who had followed me into storms, who had risked everything on my command. And yet, betrayal rarely came from strangers. I tried tracing the number, but the system flagged it as unregistered, bouncing through too many channels to pin down. Whoever sent it knew what they were doing. By dawn, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin. I forced myself through physical training, my muscles aching, my breath harsh in the cold air. Each push-up, each sprint, felt less like discipline and more like punishment. Afterward, I stood under the showers until the water ran cold, the tile walls echoing with the rush. I closed my eyes and tried to hear something other than my own doubts. My father's voice, maybe, telling me to stand tall, to carry the Chavez name with pride. But even memory betrayed me. All I could hear was Gabriel, shouting in the hangar, his voice raw with anger. "You lied to us." The phrase replayed like a wound that refused to close. Later that day, I was called back to command. My co's face was unreadable as he handed me a file. Orders from Washington. My heart clenched as I scanned the words. Faith Chavez, provisionally selected for Joint Strategic Leadership Program, Washington, D.C. provisionally. That word again, sharp as glass. It meant opportunity, yes, but also a leash. Washington was not simply rewarding me, they were testing me, watching to see if I would stumble before they pulled me into the spotlight. "Congratulations," my co said flatly, as though the word itself was dangerous. Then he added, softly, "Everyone will be watching now. Don't give them reason to confirm their suspicions." I saluted, my hand steady, though my chest burned. That evening, as I walked back across the tarmac, I caught sight of a figure in the distance. Standing near the perimeter fence, half in shadow, watching. The floodlight flickered, and for a second the face disappeared into darkness. When I blinked, the figure was gone. I stood there, the cold wind biting at my skin, my heart pounding harder than it had in combat. I told myself it was fatigue, a trick of light, but the truth clawed deeper. Someone was there. Watching, waiting. Back in my quarters, I sat on the bed, the file from Washington open on my lap, the message still glowing on my phone. "Look closer at those around you." The path ahead was no longer just about proving myself. It was about survival in a game I had not chosen to play. A game where family was a weapon, where loyalty was fragile, and where the shadows seemed to know more about me than I knew about myself. And as much as I wanted to believe Washington would be my salvation, another truth gnawed at me. By stepping into the spotlight, I was not escaping the storm. I was walking straight into its eye. Washington carried a different kind of weight than the bases I had lived on for most of my life. At home, the air smelled of salt, fuel, and metal, heavy with the rhythm of machines. Here, it was polished stone, freshly brewed coffee, and ambition. The streets pulsed with urgency, not from engines, but from conversations carried too quietly to catch, as if every stranger were plotting something behind closed doors. The Joint Strategic Leadership Program was held in a building older than my father's service record. Its marble floors gleamed beneath chandeliers, and portraits of generals, admirals, and statesmen stared down from the walls. I caught myself pausing once, tracing their stern gazes, wondering if any of them had ever walked into this place with rumors at their back, with whispers about whether they belonged. From the moment I arrived, I felt the weight of eyes on me. Not the familiar eyes of my squadron, who had flown with me through storms and trusted me to bring them home, but the sharper, colder kind, rivals. Officers from every branch, each hand-picked, each hungry for the same thing, a seat at tables where wars were decided before a single boot touched ground. Introductions were stiff, rehearsed. Colonel Sanders from the Army gripped my hand firmly, his smile too wide, his voice dipped in sugar. "Heard you've had quite the year, Chavez. Making the cut here is no small feat. Congratulations." The words should have sounded polite, but there was something in his eyes, a gleam that told me he was already measuring me, looking for cracks. Others didn't bother with masks. Major Rhodes from the Navy brushed past me in the hallway, his voice pitched just loud enough for the group around him to hear. Helps to have friends in high places. The others chuckled softly, not at the joke itself, but at the confidence of saying it out loud. My fists clenched at my sides, but I forced my face into the mask I had worn since the ceremony back at base. Calm, composed, untouchable. They wanted me to react. I would not give them the satisfaction. The days here were brutal. Mornings began before dawn with physical training, designed less for fitness and more for competition, who could outlast, who could dominate. Lectures followed, dense with strategy, history, politics. Afternoons bled into simulations that pushed us to the edge, pitting us against one another in scenarios where one wrong decision meant theoretical lives lost and reputations destroyed. I thrived in the chaos. I always had. The faster the clock ticked, the sharper my mind became. Still, thriving here was not enough. Every success I earned was weighed against a question I could feel lingering in the room. Was it truly mine, or was it borrowed from Marcus Kellen's shadow? The war game simulation that week made it clear. The scenario: a hostile blockade threatening trade routes, with both civilian and military vessels caught in the crossfire. I was named commander, tasked with coordinating resources from air, sea, and land, each controlled by another officer with their own ambitions. The pressure was instant. Sanders argued for brute force, Rhodes insisted on naval dominance, and a Marine colonel demanded ground insertion. I listened, weighed options, then issued my orders with clipped precision, split resources, hit weak points, buy time for evacuation. Voices rose in protest, but I held my ground. The clock ticked. In the final moments, our forces broke through, civilians extracted, casualties lower than projected. The simulation ended in victory. Barely, but decisively. I allowed myself one slow breath of relief until Rhodes raised his hand. "With all due respect, sir," he said to the instructor, "I think some of us are curious whether Colonel Chavez's success was strategy or mentorship." The word cut deeper than I expected. Mentorship. He didn't mean mentors in general. He meant Kellen. The instructor glanced at me, waiting for my response. My pulse pounded, but my voice stayed steady. "Respectfully, Major Rhodes, I didn't hear General Kellen in my headset when the blockade closed in. The orders came from me." The responsibility was mine. A few heads nodded, but others smirked. The seed had been planted. My victory had already been tainted in their eyes. That night, the city lights glowed beyond my quarters, spread like constellations across the horizon. I sat at my desk, uniform jacket hung neatly on the chair, hair damp from the shower, fatigue pressing against my bones. Yet sleep would not come. My mind replayed every word from the day, every glance, every laugh. My phone buzzed against the desk. Unknown number, the same one from before. "They won't let you rise. They're waiting for you to fall." I stared at the words, my chest tightening. The timing was too precise. Whoever this was, they weren't just watching me. They were following me here into Washington, into the heart of this program. I typed back quickly, fingers trembling. "Who are you? Why are you contacting me?" The dots blinked. Slowly, deliberately, because you need to know the truth. Gabriel wasn't the target. "You are." The air in the room seemed to vanish. I read it once, twice, 3 times, as if repetition might make the meaning change. But it didn't. Not him, me. I set the phone down, my hands shaking. The rumors, the breach, the whispers that followed me across bases and into this city, they weren't coincidences. They weren't just Gabriel's anger or Kellen's defense. Someone was moving pieces, and I was at the center of the board. The portraits in the hallways, the rivals in the classroom, the laughter that lingered behind my back, it all pressed in tighter, suffocating. For the first time, I realized this wasn't about my career at all. It was about survival in a game I hadn't even known I was playing. And as the city outside thrummed with its restless energy, I sat in the dim glow of the desk lamp, clutching the phone like it was both a weapon and a curse, wondering if I had already lost before the game had even begun. The rhythm of the program was unrelenting. Mornings blurred into nights, the days filled with war games, crisis simulations, and strategy sessions that demanded not just skill but political instinct. It wasn't enough to be right. You had to convince the room you were right, to pull others into your orbit while quietly weakening your rivals. For most of the others, this was a game they'd been preparing for their whole careers. For me, it felt like a battlefield where the weapons were not rifles or aircraft, but whispers and alliances. I had fought enemies I could see, enemies who bled when struck. But here, every smile could conceal a knife. The tension reached its peak during the second week. The scenario: cyber intrusion crippling a nation's air defense system. We were divided into task forces, each responsible for a different response. I was placed in charge of coordinating the counterstrike. The simulation room buzzed with urgency, screens glowing with cascading lines of code, maps flashing red as systems went dark. Officers shouted over one another, theories flying, strategies clashing. I pushed forward, issuing orders, cutting through noise, trying to build cohesion where chaos reigned. Then Sanders interrupted, his voice carrying just enough authority to stall the room. "With all due respect, Chavez, maybe we should reconsider whether you're the right one to lead this." I froze, the weight of every eye turning toward me. Sanders folded his arms, his voice steady but sharp. "Cyber warfare is new territory. Some of us have specialized training. We wouldn't want history repeating itself, an unexpected breach that catches command off guard." The words hit harder than any bullet. History repeating itself. He was talking about Gabriel, about the base, about me. Whispers rippled through the room. Rhodes smirked, leaning back in his chair, clearly enjoying the spectacle. My throat tightened, but I forced my voice out steady. "Respectfully, Colonel, leadership isn't about coding skills. It's about coordinating expertise and making decisions under pressure. If you doubt my ability, watch the results." The instructor allowed the simulation to continue. I drove the task force forward, each decision sharp, deliberate. We traced the intrusion, cut off access points, restored defense systems piece by piece. By the end, the scenario closed in victory, yet the applause was thin. The respect was thinner. Afterward, I overheard Sanders in the hallway, his voice pitched low but not low enough. "She's reckless. If it weren't for Kellen, she'd have been pulled weeks ago." I wanted to storm in to confront him, but I didn't. Rage was a weapon my rivals wanted me to wield against myself. Instead, I walked away, jaw clenched, chest burning. That night, my phone buzzed again. "Same number. They're baiting you. They want you unstable. Don't give it to them." I stared at the screen, my pulse racing. Whoever this was, they knew too much. Too much about me, too much about the program. Were they inside these walls? I typed back, the words sharp. "What do you want from me?" The reply came almost instantly. "To keep you alive." Alive, the word chilled me. This wasn't just about reputation anymore. It was something deeper, darker. The next morning, I received a sealed envelope during breakfast. No sender, no mark, just my name written in block letters. Inside was a single photograph. Grainy, black and white, but clear enough. Gabriel, standing outside a government building in Washington. Beside him, blurred, unidentifiable, but wearing a uniform. My hands trembled as I stared at it. This wasn't just a coincidence. Gabriel was here, and he wasn't alone. I tucked the photograph back into the envelope, my breath shallow. Someone wanted me to see this. Someone wanted me to know that my brother was no longer just a personal embarrassment or a family wound. He was part of something larger, something moving in shadows. That afternoon, during another simulation, my concentration faltered. My team noticed. Rhodes pounced, his voice sharp enough to draw blood. "Careful, Chavez, distraction gets people killed." The room laughed softly, cruelly. I forced myself to finish the scenario, to issue orders, to win again, but the victory felt hollow. Because all I could see was the photograph burning in my mind. When the session ended, I walked the halls alone, the portraits of dead men staring down at me as if daring me to falter. My reflection in the polished glass looked back tired, bruised by doubt, but unbroken. They wanted me unstable. They wanted me to fall. But if Gabriel was in Washington, then this wasn't just about my career. It was about survival. Mine. That night, as I lay awake listening to the hum of the city, I made a promise to myself. I would find out who brought Gabriel here. I would find out why I was the target. And when I did, I would not just survive this storm. I would own it. The first sign of the storm wasn't an explosion or a warning siren. It was silence. I was in the simulation hall, finishing an after-action review, when the big screen on the wall flickered. At first, I thought it was another training scenario. Our instructors loved to throw curveballs, a power outage here, a systems hiccup there. But this was different. The flicker spread across every monitor. The hum of electronics faltered. The ceiling lights dimmed, one row at a time, until the room was cast in a dull, uneven glow. Around me, the other officers looked up from their desks. Sanders muttered something under his breath, Rhodes smirked as if waiting for the reveal, and a few others chuckled nervously, expecting the instructors to burst in and announce a surprise drill. Only the instructors weren't laughing. They were huddled near the command console, speaking quickly into headsets that returned only static. One of them slammed a fist against the keyboard. The sound carried through the silence like a gunshot. That was when the alarms began. They weren't the shrill bells of a fire drill or the low rumble of a base alert. These alarms pulsed, high and sharp, echoing through the hallways with a rhythm that crawled under my skin. Red lights strobed against the walls. One word flashed on the central screen: intrusion. My breath caught. Not a drill, not practice. This was real. We were rushed down into the secure command center, a bunker-like room deep beneath the building. The air was thick, humming with generators. Rows of analysts hunched over terminals, their faces pale, screens glowing with cascading lines of code. Red alerts flashed across maps of the East Coast. A young analyst's voice cracked as he reported, intrusion confirmed, multiple nodes compromised. Civilian air traffic control, naval comm lines, missile defense early warning. Simultaneous strikes, sir. The instructors barked questions, trying to keep up. Sanders pushed forward, demanding updates. Rhodes was already speculating about naval vulnerability. The room buzzed with overlapping voices, each trying to stake ground, each trying to be heard. I forced my own voice to cut through. Where's the entry point? The analyst hesitated, fingers flying over keys, sweat dripping down his forehead. Too many nodes at once, Colonel. Hard to pinpoint. On the main map, red pulses spread like an infection, jumping from state to state. Civilian flights froze midair on the screen. Communications lines blinked out one by one. Then I saw it. A single node, highlighted, pulsing differently than the rest. Coordinates that made my stomach clench, my old base. No, the word slipped out before I could stop it. The lead instructor turned sharply. Colonel Chavez, I straightened, forcing control back into my voice. That node, if they're inside, it could be a backdoor into the entire network. Cut it off. Now, orders rippled across the room. Technicians scrambled. But my mind was already racing. Of all the targets in the country, they had chosen that base. The one Gabriel had breached. The one where everything began. It couldn't be coincidence. For the next hour, the command center was a war zone of its own. Analysts shouted updates, officers argued strategies, alarms shrieked as more systems faltered. I found myself stepping forward, not waiting for permission. Isolate segments. Prioritize defense grids. Separate military from civilian. Some resisted, but urgency left no time for debate. My voice carried, steady despite the chaos, and slowly the team aligned. Step by step, we clawed control back. Flights grounded, yes, but not lost. Naval comms disrupted, but partially restored. Early warning radar blinking, but not blind. We weren't winning. We were bleeding less. And sometimes, that was the best you could hope for. Hours later, when the worst had passed, the room sagged with exhaustion. Analysts collapsed into chairs, officers leaned against walls, their faces pale. Sanders was still barking orders long after the crisis had dulled, as though volume could disguise his fear. Rhodes leaned back with that same smug smirk, but even he couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders. I stayed where I was, hands braced against the console, staring at the map. The pulsing node of my old base was still there, dimmer now but not gone. A scar, a reminder. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I knew I shouldn't check it. Not here, not now, but instinct overrode regulation. I slipped it out beneath the console, one new message. It begins, "He was only the door, you are the key." My skin went cold. I stared at the words, the noise of the command center fading into static. He, Gabriel, they weren't after him. He was a pawn. The real target was me. I shoved the phone back into my pocket, forcing myself to breathe, forcing myself to keep my face neutral, unreadable. But inside, panic clawed at me. Every suspicion, every whisper, every rumor, it wasn't just fallout from my brother's mistakes. It was design, deliberate. By nightfall, the situation was classified as contained. Civilian flights remained grounded, military comms strained, but catastrophe had been avoided. Barely. We were dismissed, one by one. Sanders gave me a look that lingered too long, as if daring me to admit guilt. Rhodes muttered something about lucky guesses. I ignored them both, walking through the sterile hallways that now felt narrower, darker, heavier. Outside, Washington's skyline blazed with light, but it felt more like fire than safety. Another message buzzed on my phone as I crossed the courtyard to my quarters. You can't protect him, but you can stop them. Decide which matters more. I froze beneath the floodlights, the words glowing against the dark. Gabriel, my brother. The boy who had followed me into the woods when we were children, the man who had stood in the hangar shouting my name. Could I sacrifice him to stop this? Could I live with the choice? I tucked the phone away, my throat tight. The cold night air stung my lungs, but I welcomed it. I needed the sting, needed something to keep me grounded as the shadows closed in. I thought of my father, his steady voice, his insistence that duty came before all else. I thought of Kellen, his warning that sometimes collapse was only avoided by making impossible choices. And I thought of Gabriel, standing in that photograph beside a blurred figure in uniform, already deeper in this storm than I had ever imagined. The message was clear. The choice was coming: protect my brother, or stop the ones who had turned him into a weapon. And the terrifying truth was, I wasn't sure which side of me would win. Sleep became impossible after the intrusion. My body was exhausted, but my mind spun with images of red pulsing nodes, maps flashing warnings, and Gabriel's face burned into every memory. The next morning, the program carried on as though nothing had happened. Instructors lectured, officers argued, simulations resumed. Yet there was a tension in the air, a crackling unease. Everyone knew the intrusion had been real. Everyone knew it had almost broken us, but no one spoke of it directly. Silence became the armor we all wore. For me, silence was unbearable. During a break, I slipped away to the archives room, a place most officers avoided because it smelled of dust and ink, not ambition. I requested the logs from the intrusion, my clearance begrudgingly granted. The records scrolled across the screen, lines of code, timestamps, IP traces bouncing across continents. To most, it would look like noise. To me, one pattern screamed. The entry point had originated from my old base. The exact gate where Gabriel had slipped inside. My chest tightened. Someone had left that door open weeks ago. Someone had been waiting for the right moment to push through. Gabriel hadn't been the breach. He had been the key to unlocking it. My phone buzzed again. You're close. Look deeper. I nearly dropped it. Whoever this was, they weren't just watching. They were guiding me. But why? I typed quickly, my fingers stiff. Who are you? Tell me the truth. The reply came slower than before. I am someone who's seen what happens when people like you are silenced. They used him. They're using you. The storm won't stop unless you do. I stared at the words, the ache in my chest heavier than steel. That night, I went to find him. The photograph had shown Gabriel in Washington. I had traced the background of the building in the image, cross-referenced its stone arches and narrow windows. It led me to a government annex on the edge of the city, one seldom noticed unless you knew where to look. I waited until dusk, blending with the shadows, heart hammering with every car that passed. And then I saw him, Gabriel. He looked thinner than the last time, his hair longer, his clothes rumpled. But it was him unmistakably. He walked with someone else, a man in uniform, face obscured by the brim of his cap. They spoke quietly, their heads bent close, their movements deliberate. I stepped forward before I could stop myself. Gabe, he froze, whipping around, his eyes wide. For a second, they softened. My sister, he whispered. The man beside him stiffened. Gabriel shook his head quickly and muttered something I couldn't hear. Then he turned back to me, his face hardening. You shouldn't be here, Faith. Neither should you. I took a step closer, but he raised a hand, stopping me. His eyes darted toward the man in uniform. You don't understand. It's bigger than you think. Then tell me what they're doing. He hesitated, torn, his lips parting as though words were fighting to escape. But the man grabbed his arm, tugging him back. Enough. Gabriel pulled free, his voice raw. She deserves to know. The man's hand went to his radio, speaking too low for me to catch. Gabriel looked at me, desperation in his eyes. Faith, they're not after me. Thereafter, the man shoved him into the car before he could finish. Doors slammed, tires screeched, and they were gone before I could move. I stood in the fading light, my chest burning, the echo of his words twisting like a knife. Not after him, after me. When I returned to the program later that night, the instructors were waiting. Their faces were unreadable, their voices clipped. Chavez, we need to speak. They led me into a sealed briefing room. The lights were harsh, the air cold. A dossier lay on the table. Inside were photographs, surveillance stills, reports. One image froze my blood, Gabriel outside the annex. My own shadow in the corner of the frame, watching him. One of the instructors leaned forward. You've had contact with the suspect. My throat dried. Suspect, my brother. We believe he's been working with a network targeting national defense, they continued. And we believe his access to the base weeks ago was facilitated by someone inside. The word hung in the air. Someone inside. They were looking at me. I forced my voice steady. If you're accusing me, then you'd better have more than photographs. Their eyes didn't waver. We're saying this, Colonel. You're either going to help us bring him in or you'll go down with him. The silence stretched, heavy as lead. My mind spun back to Gabriel's face, his desperate words. They're not after me, they're after me. The twist fell into place like a blade sliding home. Gabriel had been used, a pawn on a board too large for him to understand. The real target, the real prize, was me, my career, my name, my influence in this program. I walked out of the room, dossier clutched in my hands, the weight of it pressing into my skin. The city outside still glowed, but all I saw were shadows moving within it. I was no longer just a soldier trying to prove herself. I was the weapon they wanted to control or destroy. The dossier sat on my desk like a bomb. I hadn't opened it again since the briefing. I couldn't. The photographs of Gabriel, the reports of intercepted calls, the grainy surveillance stills, they pressed on me like lead weights, threatening to crush the air from my lungs. But it wasn't the evidence that haunted me. It was his eyes. The way he'd looked at me outside that annex. Desperate. Torn. As if every word he hadn't managed to say was clawing at his throat. They're not after me. They're after me. The words replayed until they carved into my bones. The program carried on as if nothing had shifted, but everything had. The instructors eyed me differently now. Some of the officers avoided me altogether. Others watched with sharper interest, as though waiting for the moment I slipped, waiting for proof that I didn't belong here after all. Sanders was the boldest. During a strategy exercise, he made his attack. It's a conflict of interest, he said, his tone crisp, his eyes locked on mine. With her brother under investigation, how can we trust her judgment? How can we trust her loyalty? The room went still, all eyes on me. I forced my voice calm, controlled. Loyalty isn't inherited, it's proven every day. My record speaks for itself, Rhodes smirked. Records can be rewritten. The words burned, but I didn't flinch. I had faced storms, fire, loss, I could face this too. That evening, I finally opened the dossier again. Not to read the reports, I knew what they said. But to study the blurred edges, the things hidden in shadows. In one photo, Gabriel stood near the annex wall. Behind him, barely visible, was a symbol painted faintly in white. A circle bisected by a line. I had seen it once before. Back at the base, etched into the corner of a locker near the security station. It wasn't graffiti. It was a mark, a signal, and if the same symbol appeared in both places, then this network wasn't improvising. It was organized, structured. Deep. My phone buzzed again. You're running out of time. Choose, protect him or stop them. I typed back, my fingers shaking. Who are they? Tell me everything. The reply came after a long pause. They are already inside. Higher than you imagine. If you wait, you lose both him and yourself. The words hollowed me out. Inside. Higher than you imagine. That night, I dreamed of storms. Of standing in a hangar with the wind howling, Gabriel's voice breaking through the roar, shouting my name. When I turned, he was gone, swallowed by shadows. And when I looked down, my own uniform was stained with symbols I didn't understand. I woke drenched in sweat, my heart hammering. By dawn, I had made my decision. I went to the instructors, requested a private meeting. Their faces were wary, as though expecting a confession. Instead, I placed the dossier on the table and said, if you want him brought in, I'll do it myself. They studied me, silent, weighing my words. Finally, the lead instructor nodded. Permission granted. But understand, Chavez, this isn't family business anymore. If he resists, you treat him like any other target. My jaw tightened. Understood. When I left the room, the weight of the decision settled over me like armor. Painful, heavy, but necessary. Because if I didn't act, if I hesitated, the storm would consume not just Gabriel. It would consume me, my squadron, my country, and I had sworn an oath to protect them all, even if it meant breaking what little remained of my family. The city felt different the night I went after him. The usual hum of traffic, the flicker of neon, the hurried footsteps on sidewalks, all of it faded beneath the pounding of my heart. I wasn't in uniform. I wore plain clothes, my badge tucked into my pocket, my pistol strapped against my side. Not as a soldier, but as a sister walking into a war she hadn't chosen. The annex loomed ahead, the same building from the photograph. Its stone walls seemed colder, harder, under the dim street lamps. A guard posted near the corner barely glanced at me when I flashed the borrowed clearance. Too easy, too practiced. Someone wanted me inside. The corridors smelled of dust and stale air. My boots echoed softly, the sound too loud in the silence. Every door looked the same, unmarked, locked tight, until I reached one left slightly ajar. I pushed it open. Gabriel sat inside, alone, his head bowed, his hands trembling as he rubbed his face. He looked older than I remembered, worn down, as if the weight of his choices had aged him years. When he lifted his eyes and saw me, something broke in them. "Faith," his voice cracked. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. "You have to tell me the truth, all of it." He shook his head violently. "You shouldn't be here. You don't know what you're walking into. Then make me understand." For a long moment, he just stared at me, his jaw tight, his body shaking. Then he whispered, "They used me. They knew I could get through that gate, knew you would be tied to me. They wanted you under suspicion. They wanted you in their hands." My chest tightened. Who's behind this?" He swallowed hard, "Higher than either of us. Names I can't even say. But they're here, Faith. They're inside the system. And you," the door slammed open. Two men in uniform stepped in, weapons raised. Behind them, a third figure emerged from the shadows. General Marcus Kellen. My breath caught. He looked calm, composed, his eyes steady as they met mine. "Faith," he said, his voice deep, patient. "Put the weapon down." I hadn't even realized I had drawn it. My pistol trembled in my hand. "Sir?" My voice cracked. "This isn't what you think," he said softly. "Your brother is unstable. He's been compromised. If you stand aside, we can clean this up." I shook my head. "Clean this up? You've known all along." Kellen's gaze didn't falter. "I protected you. I gave you opportunities no one else would. I told you Washington saw your potential. That wasn't a lie, but every rising star needs a crucible. Every leader needs a test." My stomach twisted. This wasn't mentorship. This wasn't protection. It was control. Gabriel shouted, "He's one of them, don't you see? He's the one." The guards yanked him back, a fist slamming into his gut. He doubled over, coughing. I raised my pistol higher, my arms rigid, my heart screaming, "Sir, if you're with them. If you're part of this." Kellen stepped closer, his voice calm, almost gentle. "Faith, think. You can either throw away your career for a traitor or you can stand beside me. Together, we can shape the future." My pulse hammered. The room blurred. I saw Gabriel on his knees, bleeding. I saw Kellen, steady, patient, offering me power, offering me survival. And I saw myself, standing at the center of it all, torn between blood and duty, between family and the oath I had sworn. I took a breath that felt like fire. My father's voice echoed in my mind. "Stand and lead." I pulled the trigger. The shot rang out like thunder. Kellen staggered, shock flashing across his face before he collapsed. The guards froze, stunned. Gabriel lunged forward, grabbing one man's weapon, striking the other with desperate fury. In seconds, the room was chaos, shouts, fists, gunfire echoing against concrete. When it was over, silence fell. Kellen lay still, the guards unconscious or dead. Gabriel slumped against the wall, panting, his hands shaking. I lowered my pistol, my arms trembling, tears blurring my vision. "It's over," I whispered. Gabriel looked at me, pain carved deep into his face. "No, this was just one head of the snake. They're still out there." I knew he was right. Killing Kellen hadn't ended it, but it had revealed the truth. The threat wasn't from outside, it was woven into the system itself, and I was at its center now. When the authorities arrived, I didn't hide. I gave my report, my voice steady, my eyes unflinching. They would spin it, they would question it, but the truth was burned into the walls of that room. Weeks later, I stood in the Pentagon, the halls echoing with footsteps, the weight of history pressing on every stone. My promotion orders were read aloud, my new position confirmed. I was no longer just a pilot, no longer just a squadron commander. I was a strategist, a leader with a seat at the table where futures were written. They pinned the insignia to my uniform, the fabric pressing heavy against my chest. Applause followed, though I barely heard it. My eyes drifted to the crowd, searching. Gabriel wasn't there. He had vanished again, slipping into the shadows, carrying secrets I wasn't ready to face. But his absence didn't break me. Because when I walked out of that hall, the sun glinting off the marble steps, I felt the weight of the oath I had chosen. I had stood. I had led. And no storm, no whisper, no shadow, no betrayal would take that from me.